las plataformas como Amazon o Google. Y vamos a traernos esa experiencia a través de ella para llevárnosla y a ver cómo la podemos implementar, esta palabra que también se dice tanto en nuestros respectivos ámbitos y contextos. Para dirigir esta charla tenemos a Antonio Ortiz, director editorial de Weblogs, que seguramente tiene muchas preguntas que todos compartimos y que va a plantear a continuación. Y va a ser la última conversación antes de las conclusiones que vendrán después y espero que nada, la disfrutéis y seguimos. Un aplauso, por favor, para ellos.
My place. I think you are there. Allí. Okay. Well. Okay. This is a Spanglish session.
Sí.
As you know, Anne will give us her speech in English, but in order to be more agile, I will make the question in Spanish, so you can do it the same way. Well, the truth is, we don't want to punish Anne with my English. That's true. So, ella en inglés, yo en español, para entendernos. Anne Hyatt, creo que es un lujo compartir este momento contigo.
No tengo mi... Sorry. Sí,
Okay.
esto. Gracias.
Ok. Es un lujo tener a Anne Hyatt con nosotros. I'm talking about you, so you
Sí,
can
entiendo.
Muchas veces uno se siente un poco con el síndrome del impostor. Es ese punto en el que uno está diciendo, bueno, Google por allá, Amazon por otro lado, ¿no? Como si uno pues tuviera muchísima información, muchísimo conocimiento sobre ellos. Para mí es ese sentimiento, que me dedico además a los medios de tecnología y de Internet, es un poco más agudo. Porque Anne viene con más de 15 años de experiencia en grandes empresas digitales norteamericanas. Ha sido Executive Business Partner y Chief of Staff to the Chairman, trabajando codo con codo, muy cerca de gente del nivel de Eric Schmidt en Google, Jeff Bezos y también Marissa Mayer en Yahoo. O en Google y Yahoo.
A Google.
En Google, okay. Por lo tanto, bueno, creo que es el momento, por supuesto, yo creo que de atender al discurso de Anne y bueno, os dejo directamente con ella, luego tendremos tiempo de sacar a pasear pues algunos de los debates que ha habido ya en el Congreso y de todas las preguntas que tengáis, por supuesto. Por favor.
Bien. Great, thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to take this off now. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. So my presentation today is going to be some lessons that I've learned in innovation from working at Google and Amazon for the last 15 years. I'm hopeful that these lessons that I've learned are applicable to you in your personal ambitions, in your professional ambitions, and are inspiring in general. I've chosen a format that's a little bit like storytelling, given our audience today. So I'm going to take you along in my journey of this very unexpected path of starting my career at Amazon and going through Google for the last 15 years. So I have chosen several themes that I've noticed are common denominators between all three of these tech giants. The first of which is being fearless. Now, fearless was the lesson I had to learn first because I came into technology by accident. My parents moved to Redmond, Washington in the mid-'80s, and we did not expect that the tech revolution was about to start in our backyard. My first job when I was 16 years old was at a startup before anyone knew what a startup was. I went to the University of Washington. I studied international studies, focusing on Europe, not expecting how helpful that would be in my future life. And while I was there, I worked at the European Union Center. While I was there, the director of the program asked me what I wanted to do after I finished university. And I told him I wanted to work for a few years and then go back and do my PhD to become a professor. And his wife worked at Amazon. So he said, have you considered putting your resume into Amazon? Now, this was 2002. That we had just had the enormous tech bust. Most companies were bankrupt. Many, many people in the West Coast of the United States did not have jobs. So it was not a great time to be graduating from university. So I put my resume in thinking I need to apply everywhere to hope to find a job. So the interview process at Amazon started with one full day of just meeting 15 people back to back and answering questions all day. It was exhausting. But I learned a lot about the company and gained a lot of enthusiasm for what they were trying to do. Then they called me back 3 months later for a second round where I met with all of the vice presidents of the company. And I thought, this is an enormous waste of time. Why are they using executive time to interview me? What I did not know was they were considering me joining Jeff Bezos' team. So then when they called me 3 months after that, to bring me in again, I said, okay, you've had me interview with 25 people in your company. You know if you like me or you don't. And they said, I promise, it's just one more interview. And that interview was with Jeff. So I thought I was in the wrong room. It was just me and Jeff Bezos, and Jeff came in with his usual big energy. He stood up at the whiteboard. All of the walls in his conference room were whiteboards. He uncapped a pen and said, I'm only going to ask you 2 questions. And I thought, okay, good. And he's like, the first is, don't worry, I will do the math. And I thought, well, I am definitely in the wrong room. He thinks I'm an engineer. He's going to make me code something. I am not capable of that. But he just asked me a brain teaser. He asked me to estimate the panes of glass in the city of Seattle. I thought, okay, he just wants to see how my mind works, how I can take a big problem, break it down into manageable steps, and find a solution. So I outlined for him what I wanted to do to get to the answer of that problem, and he said, okay, let's start. And he made us do the math, fill every board in his office until we got to an answer, which he circled, sat down and said, I think that's about right. And I was exhausted. It felt like we were doing that for an hour. I'm sure it was 10 minutes, but it felt like a long time. But that's all Jeff wanted to know about me, is how my brain works, if I can handle a lot of information, if I'm intimidated by big problems, and if he could really train me to think like he did. And so his second question was just, tell me about yourself and why you want to work here. And by then, I had met so many amazing people and understood their mission. I really, really wanted to work there. And so he hired me on the spot. So he came out of the room. He said, this is your desk right outside of his office. And I started immediately. And I had no idea how applicable that interview was for the rest of my 3 years working with Jeff. It was enormous problem after enormous problem. And we had to spend a lot of time thinking about how to do things that no one in the world has ever done before. But it was a privilege to do it standing next to Jeff for 3 years, to learn to think the way he thinks, ask the questions that he asks, and appreciate his booming laugh. He's one of the most energetic people I've ever met. One of my very first projects for Jeff was to help him visit several properties in Texas. And I didn't know what it was for at the time, but he gave me this piece of paper with a long list of numbers on it. And he said, I need to visit these properties next week, and I have 3 days. So I chart out where they are, and they're really far apart. Texas is enormous. And so I had to figure out how to get him to these places. And it was too close to fly with a jet, but too far to drive and see all of them in the time he gave me. So I went to my manager, John, and I said, well, this is impossible. And he didn't even look up. He just said, well, no is not an answer for Jeff, so find out a solution. Okay? So this is my first job out of college. I'm 20 years old. I don't know what I'm doing, but I think, okay, I'll hire a helicopter. So I went to my manager, John, thinking that was a crazy idea, and he was like, okay, do that. I did not know how to do that, but I figured it out. And Jeff went on the first trip. He visited the properties, was super happy, and I felt really relieved. My first big project was a success. Then he wanted to return. So at this point, Jeff is out visiting these properties in Texas, and by now I understand the enormity of my job, and I know I am not prepared for it. I don't know who these people are in tech. I don't know what Jeff is trying to build. I don't know what our hurdles are, and I was suddenly realizing how ill-prepared I was. So I would come into the office early, and in tech, early is like 8 a.m., right? Nobody else comes until 10. But I would come in early, and I noticed that every morning Jeff would read 3 newspapers, the New York Times, the Seattle Times, and the Wall Street Journal. So I started reading all 3 papers, so I knew who he was talking about, what's happening in tech, what's happening in the world, so I could be prepared to help Jeff in that environment. So one morning while Jeff was in Texas, I was there early, all alone, the only person in the building, reading and studying and trying to understand this crazy world I'd just stepped into. And I got a call from his jet pilots, and they said, "I don't want to alarm you, but there's been a helicopter crash." And my hands started shaking. Now, this is middle of nowhere, Texas. It was him. So I started making phone calls. I thought, okay, what do I need to do? I might have just killed Jeff Bezos. What is your first call? So I think, okay, the board of directors needs to know that. So I, as a 20-year-old, having worked at Amazon for 2 months, call an emergency board meeting. And I say, we have to be prepared. I don't know if it was him, but we need to be ready if he's hurt, if he's dead, if he's alive. If it wasn't him, we'll be ready. And in the meantime, I tried to find him. So I started calling local hospitals, asking if they had anyone come in from a helicopter crash. The first 5 or 6, no. And then on the 7th, they said, "Are you family?" And I knew I found him. So I asked them to have him call, and he called in. He talked to the board of directors, told them not to issue a statement. But this is what had happened. It was his helicopter. So it was a single engine aircraft. So if you're ever hiring a helicopter, dual engine only. I'm just pro tip. And it had been too heavy for takeoff because in Texas it gets really hot and suddenly in the morning, and it was not powerful enough for the heat, so it crashed. And of course, in the only body of water within miles of where they were. So Jeff actually was a hero in this story. He climbed out of the helicopter, he pulled out the pilot, he pulled out the ranch owner who had broken his collarbone and was on top of his personal assistant in the back with her face underwater. So he saved everyone on board. Now eventually, we kept this story from getting out for a long time, but about 6 months later, a journalist was writing a story about the space tourism industry and discovered that Jeff had been in Texas because he was building what is now Blue Origin, his space tourism company. And that's why he didn't want anyone to know he was there, because he was racing with Elon Musk and other people for the X Prize at the time. But when the story did break, this was the cover image. Obviously, this isn't a real picture, but Jeff likes it because he's a hero, and he really was. So this trial by fire, these first few weeks at Amazon, really changed me in important ways. When Jeff called in to talk to the board, and when he finished with them, he asked to speak with me. And I thought he was going to fire me. Almost killing him is a fireable offense, I think. So I was okay with that. But when he got me on the phone, he said, "Anne, I hear you're really good under pressure." And that was probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. But it was important in a few ways. One, because it changed the way that he saw me. Instead of seeing me as this 20-year-old who has no idea what she's doing, which was true, he saw me as somebody who was smart enough to stay calm under pressure and to figure it out. And maybe more importantly, it changed the way I saw myself. I trusted myself to do really hard things, to survive a crisis, and to be fearless. Now, being fearless became even more important to me in the next parts of my journey. But I think one of the most important things I learned from Jeff was his principle he calls regret minimization. He's famous for talking about this in several interviews. But it all started from an interview with a journalist who asked him why he left his very, very good job at D.E. Shaw to move across the country and start a business in his garage. And he told the reporter he knew at the end of his life he would regret more not having tried than he would if he tried and failed. And that principle really resonates with me, and I think is applicable to many industries now, of taking a risk, doing something differently, using your resources in a new way, and riding this crazy wave into the future. So that brings me to, this is my last day. Jeff and I both look really different now. But this was probably the most important part of my business development, was sitting side by side with Jeff for 3 years. The next principle is being humble. Now, I know Silicon Valley CEOs don't have a reputation for being the most humble people in the world, but the ones who are the most impactful definitely are. Jeff is a great example of that. He has a role that he calls shadow, where he hires a promising young person at Amazon to come and literally shadow him, attend every meeting, read every email, read every briefing document, so that they have an understanding of his world, the way his mind works, the questions he asks, how he values different factors in decision making, and that person then grows and becomes an important executive in the company. And that person, when I was there, was Andy Jassy, who now runs Amazon Web Services, which, as you know, is $1 billion company all on its own. So being humble enough to subject yourself to peer review, to ask for critique, to ask your peers for evaluations on not only your failures, but also on your successes, will help you decipher a formula for success that will grow your impact within your corporation and the success of your company as a whole. So humility is a really important part of that. And the next part of my journey was a continuation. So I told Jeff in my interview that I had always planned to become a professor. So after 3 years, I did. I left Amazon, probably at the time when most people would join. I left as they were becoming profitable. The board was no longer trying to fire him, because when I joined, they were trying to fire him and bring in a professional CEO. So I had really weathered all the storms, and once he was off on his way, I kind of continued my journey and have enjoyed watching his success ever since. But I got in to graduate school at University of California in Berkeley to do a PhD in international studies, focusing on Scandinavia. And while I was there, I had to use all of these lessons that I'd learned at Amazon, because I was the dumbest person in the room. And what I learned later is everyone in graduate school feels that way. You walk into a conversation that's been going on for 1,000 years before you arrived and will continue 1,000 years after you're gone. But you have to be comfortable in asking what might be a stupid question, or contributing in a new way that's unique to you, and being comfortable in that space. While I was there, I started getting recruiting phone calls from Google. And at first I said, no, thank you. I'm really happy in academics. And I think no one had ever told them that before. No one says no when Google offers you a job. But eventually, after a year or so, they talked me into coming to interview, and I did. This is Google. This is literally my first office is right there to the side of the E. And the moment I stepped foot on campus, I knew I was in the right place. I had been hesitant to leave my PhD because I enjoyed being surrounded by the smartest people in the world. And at Google, I found an extension of that family. And I learned to ask questions and use my knowledge in a new way, not be afraid of failure or trying new things, which I think is very applicable to your industry, as we're trying to innovate and stay competitive in an environment that's constantly changing. The bar is constantly being raised, and so you need to meet that and anticipate that and exceed it. And the next 12 years, I spent doing that. When I was first at Google, I didn't know a single person, not one. And in tech and in business in general, your relationships are a big part of your success. So I spent a lot of time just trying to learn and ask. And those friendships and that expertise that I gained from them has helped me succeed over the last decade. I think one of the things I noticed most common between my executives at Amazon and Google is that they're voracious readers. They read at an Olympic level. They are reading every newspaper, every book, every current event. They're hungry for knowledge. And I think that's a key for anyone in any industry, is to be curious, not to become complacent in your expertise or what you know or your comfort zone of how you're doing things, but challenge yourself and get outside of that zone and increase your learning. I'll talk about that more towards the end. But the third principle that I noticed between these three amazing executives was they were extremely influential. And not only in the social media way that we define that now, they are obviously in the public eye, but they do that in subtle one-on-one conversations, the way that they manage their teams, the way that they hire, the way that they challenge themselves or are vulnerable in ways of publicly making mistakes and owning up to that and moving on quickly. I think those principles are applicable to this industry as well, while you're iterating and trying new things within the publishing world, digitization of books. I know it's an evolving process, and that's something I think is really helpful. While I was there, I first worked for Marissa Mayer before she was CEO at Yahoo. She was in charge of search products and user experience, and that meant we were just in charge of making cool things. Other people got to figure out how to make money off of it. We just made fun things that we thought our users would enjoy. And that took me around the world. We met with presidents of countries, with other major CEOs. We just went to countries to observe the way that they were using technology and it was being developed. I started at Google in 2006. So this is the time before mobile. So we were really learning about how to put mobile first and to get ahead of that learning curve. But while I was there, I shared some of my ideas with Marissa in a way that maybe weren't originally anticipated. At first, some of my ideas or feedback were met with silence because she was just like, okay, she wasn't expecting that from me. But I shared some of my interests and my expertise from my studies in international studies, and she started using me in more effective ways, like writing briefing docs or preparing for meetings with heads of state. This is the two of us a long time ago, in Israel with Shimon Peres, who passed away last year, negotiating some partnerships with universities in Tel Aviv to bring in new talent, more diversity within the tech pipeline. And those kind of meetings really broadened the horizons for the products that we were designing, but also for me personally, as part of my personal business development. Now, this lesson, this is my friend Reggie Love. He's one of my favorite people. They need no introduction. Everyone recognizes the Obamas. But this is a principle that I've seen be successful in lots of different environments. So my friend Reggie started with Barack Obama, working for him when he was a senator. And he was there just as a volunteer, and he was put in charge of managing the mail, like literally the physical mail that got delivered by the truckload to Obama as a senator. And Reggie maximized that opportunity, which sounds like a horribly boring job, and most people would just try and get rid of it as soon as possible. But he automated it, he made it more effective, he increased the response time to the constituents, which made Obama's impact even greater, and he got noticed. So volunteering for a project that doesn't sound very exciting can literally change your life. So by Reggie doing a really good job with something super boring, he was chosen to be special assistant for Barack Obama. He helped him through that campaign and worked with him for 6 years in the White House. So this principle of going outside of your job description, challenging yourself in a new way, making a boring project more impactful to get noticed or to develop contacts or to expand your industry knowledge can have enormous ripple effects in your expertise and in your future. So the fourth principle is being curious, which I talked about a little bit earlier. All of these executives are insatiably curious. They want to know everything, and they're unafraid of stepping outside of their comfort zone in a way that I think is very, very rare. Most people at that level want to be seen as an expert all the time. But Jeff and Marissa and Eric are people who are willing to look stupid when exploring a new topic or asking a dumb question or going to a place where they don't know anyone so that they can learn new things and expand their expertise. Eric literally has a plaque on his desk that says, "If at all possible, say yes." And this is not just a slogan. This is his mantra. If there's something he doesn't know, he will explore it with extreme energy. If there's an area of expertise or a new technology, he will jump in with both feet and be the dumbest person in the room until he's an expert. And he does this professionally because it's really impacted our work, but he also just does that personally. It's who he is. Eric realized early in his career that he would be living his life on an airplane. His responsibilities were global. He had to be global. And he thought, okay, if I'm going to be living on an airplane, I want to do the fun part. I want to fly it. So he does. He became a full licensed jet pilot, and he flies himself on his jets around the world. It's very strange when you're having a briefing meeting with him, you step into the jet and he's like, oh, hang on, I'm going to do takeoff because that's the fun part. Let the other pilots do the autopilot part, and then he does the landing. It's strange. But after a few years of me working for Eric, he told me that he wanted to become a helicopter pilot also. And I said, okay, no. I have a history with helicopters. Absolutely not. If something happens, I retire. But he didn't listen to me, of course. He did it anyway. But there were some unexpected advantages from this personal endeavor of his. So a few years ago, we were in Africa. We were doing a tour across 7 countries in Africa to see ways that we could make technology more accessible for rural communities. And we were able to visit this beautiful village in the Masai Mara in Kenya because Eric was a helicopter pilot. He flew us there. We were able to access people we would have never come in contact with otherwise and see the way in which they were using their single shared mobile phone for health information, for education for the women who do not go to school, for weather reports for when they would harvest their crops, how to take care of their herd. They were using mobile technology in a way that was very unique for people from Silicon Valley. So it really helped us broaden the way that we could help them in giving them more useful information for their daily lives. And it was all because Eric is curious and a little crazy. The last principle is being balanced. Now, I know all of us run at a global pace. Publishing is a fast industry. Tech in general is a very fast industry. So I want to acknowledge that I'm asking you to do 2 things simultaneously. I want you to kind of rest while running, but I think I would be remiss if I was delivering all these principles of more impact, more curiosity, saying yes to more and more things, if I didn't counterbalance this with an acknowledgement that you need to do something that sustains you at that pace, whether it's being with your children or taking a music class or prioritizing your morning run, making sure that you have things that rejuvenate you and give you that energy that you need to be impactful in your business. This is an example of how I did not do that for a long time. I'm a bad example of work-life balance, honestly. This was my birthday a few years ago. That's Eric, and we're on his plane. That's Kim, my teammate. And it was my birthday, and I completely forgot because we started the day in California. We went down to Arizona, up to Denver, Colorado, down to North Carolina, and up to New York at the end of the day, all in one day. Now, the United States is enormous, so that's an epic journey. And by the end of it, I didn't know where I was anymore. It was exhausting. It was fun. But then they acknowledged my birthday on that last flight, which was nice. So I want to acknowledge that I have not done this, but the only reason I remain in tech is because eventually I learned that lesson, that I needed to prioritize myself and taking some time to reflect. If you're always receiving massive amounts of information, it's really hard to be thoughtful in the way to apply that. Jeff Bezos is a great example of how to do this. I wouldn't call the man balanced, but he is very good at taking time to pause and reflect on what he's learned. Every quarter, he would go on a thinking retreat where he would take a notebook and nothing else and just have no phones, no media, no TV, just starve himself of input and take the time to really reflect. And when I was there in his thinking retreats, he created Super Saver Shipping and Prime, which were the single reasons why Amazon survived the bust. That is the reason why they became profitable when no one else was. And he got that because he took time to pause and reflect and to dream. And so I encourage all of us to take those moments, to take what you're learning, the challenges in your industry, give yourself the right to leave the room and take a breath, which I feel like Europeans do much better than Americans. So really I should be saying this to them because I know you're better than we are at that. but really using that opportunity to maximize your impact. So these are the principles that I've learned from these amazing giants of technology, and I hope that they're interesting and applicable to your business lives. And now I'm really curious what questions you might have about some of these principles or my experience and ways they can be relevant for you. Thank you. Gracias.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anne.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting. So I have tengo una primera pregunta. En español es la frase
Vale.
¿qué hace una chica como tú en Javea? Es decir, seguro que hay una parte de la historia que no has contado, ¿no? Que es ese salto de tu, ¿no? aterrizaje en España y en Javea concretamente.
So, yeah, so the short answer is love. So I was on vacation in Javier several years ago, and the first night I was there, I met my now husband. He just saw me on the street and decided to come up and talk to me. And here we are many years later. We just got married in April. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. But really, it is, if I'm honest, a major adjustment coming from Silicon Valley to Spain. But while I did it for love, it has been a great professional development opportunity for me, because I've really enjoyed seeing new ways to apply these principles from Silicon Valley within the European market. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to translate that to the people here in Spain, in London, in Germany, all across Europe, and help them transition their businesses into this global space. Mm-hmm. It's fun because I feel like I'm coming a little bit like an alien from the future, telling you like what it's going to be in 5 or 10 years from now if trends continue. So it's been really rewarding to use those lessons in a new way to help grow European-based businesses, which I think is important for the global economy in general.
Okay.
That's how I ended up here.
Sobre esto que dices, creo que hay una pregunta que tiene que ver a lo mejor con la cultura y con la cultura de las empresas. Los ejemplos de tu trayectoria, claro, pertenecen a empresas con una cultura, con un ADN de la disrupción, ¿no? Súper innovadoras. Claro, en tu nueva etapa, y creo que aplicable para las compañías que están en el Congreso, que estamos en el Congreso, las organizaciones públicas también, es cómo se puede trabajar en la transposición, en traer esa cultura de la innovación de Silicon Valley, de Estados Unidos, a unas realidades que son muy diferentes. Y también, antes mencionabas, perdón por lo largo de la pregunta, ¿no? Ese work-life balance. ¿Qué elementos de la cultura de Silicon Valley que pueden ser vistos como negativos en el desarrollo vital, en condiciones laborales, en lo agresivo a veces de la aproximación, piensas que se deben vigilar a la hora de traerlo a Europa, o cómo lo ves?
Yeah, I acknowledge that the environment here is different, and some of the challenges are different. For example, in the consulting I'm doing now, I see bigger challenges in funding because the runway for a startup is much smaller in Europe because there's less government funding going into higher education, and there's less private equity investment in Europe in general. So a lot of my time is helping entrepreneurs through that first phase just to survive. Once you survive, if you have enough runway to be successful, then there are some other challenges that are unique to being in Europe. Talent is not one of the challenges. The talent and the curiosity and the creative thinking is very strong here. But what you really want is to prevent that brain drain so you don't have all of your talented people leaving for the States or other opportunities by properly funding those industries here. I agree that I do not want to export the American work hours. I think that would be bad for the world in general. But I think one thing that you we all can take from that is learning to work more efficiently. It doesn't need more hours. You don't need to be working 100-hour work weeks to be innovative and disruptive. What you do need to be is efficient. And that comes from these principles I was talking about being fearless and creative, being willing to fail. I think this is a big difference, cultural difference between the States and Europe in general, is this tolerance for what we call failure. In Silicon Valley, it's a badge of honor. Unless you've had 3 failed startups, most VCs won't take you seriously. And that's because they know you learn so much through trial and error. And so if you haven't been brave enough to try something that didn't work and get up and try again and get up and try again, they don't have faith in your ability to do difficult problem solving. Now, a friend of mine, he's a professor at Wharton in their business school. His name is Adam Grant. And he just wrote something very interesting on this point that I like, that says, if we took the same approach to our successes as we do to our failures, we don't need to prioritize failure. What we need to do is prioritize the learning process. So when you do a project that works really well, go to your peers and say, why do you think this was successful? What do you think were the key elements in this design that made it work? Because you do that when it fails, of like, oh, I lost that account. Why didn't why didn't this work? Why didn't you like the proposal? We do it much more with our failures. And there's probably a missed opportunity to learn from our successes as well. So I think a tolerance for failure is really important, but also being very analytical in your approach to your successes and your failures creates sort of your own formula for efficiency within your particular area.
Okay, fantástico. Ahora que estás teniendo la experiencia desde el otro lado con respecto a estas grandes compañías, hay mucho debate alrededor del concepto de frenemies. En español suena muy mal, es a mi enemigos. Con razón todos hablamos con anglicismo porque le ponen mucho mejores nombres a las cosas. Perdón. El concepto de frenemies, en el que muchos actores del sector ven que Amazon o Google o Apple tienen plataformas que necesitamos para la distribución, para el marketing, y a la vez nos compiten, y hay historias de éxito y de fracaso de gente que ha apostado por colaborar o hacer su negocio, su servicio encima de estas plataformas. Ahora desde el otro lado, ¿cuáles son los pros y los cons, ¿no? los pros y los contras de trabajar sobre las plataformas de los gigantes digitales como Apple, Facebook, Google?
Yeah, if I knew the answer to that, I would be very wealthy. I would do individual consulting contracts with all of you. No, but I think the question is really important, because I know that building on these platforms is essential for keeping pace in the global economy. And those leaders, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, these big content creators, do have the resources to kind of invent the technologies of the future. So staying current in those is really important. But at the same time, you don't want to lose ownership over what is yours. So I know a big challenge, especially for publishers now, is having their own metadata, because a lot of times that metadata, when you build on other platforms like Amazon and Google, you lose that metadata. That direct connection to your customer information is gone because you've outsourced that to another platform. So I think the challenge is, and I don't have the solution, I acknowledge, but the challenge is using those platforms in an effective way to grow at the pace of changing technology while still maintaining your identity and your connection with your individual customers. I wish there was a simple solution to that, but I do think it comes down to big data and access to that information and how that's being used and shared.
A partir de lo que dices de tener los datos del usuario y los datos de nuestro negocio, es algo que ha aparecido mucho en el Congreso. Y claro, parte de lo que flota también en este tipo de congresos, en mi opinión, es que cada año hay una gran nueva tendencia Antes de nosotros se hablaba de voz, de podcast. Tenemos ahora los asistentes de voz populares en Estados Unidos como Echo, Google Home. Este año han aparecido en español. Pero hace 2 años estaríamos hablando de realidad virtual. Hace 1 año estaríamos hablando de chatbots. Es realmente muy difícil, sobre todo si eres pequeño, estar en todo, ¿no? Es decir, voy a trabajar con datos, con voz, con realidad posible. ¿Cómo una empresa pequeña o un grupo pequeño puede tener pistas o puede tener una visión clara de lo que es, o intentar adivinar qué es una moda y qué es un cambio estructural de verdad? Es decir, una moda la puedo surfear, entre comillas, un cambio estructural de verdad cambia mi negocio. ¿Cómo desde la perspectiva de estas grandes compañías consiguen distinguirlo?
Yeah, it's a big challenge to be able to stay on top of tech trends while not get distracted from things that are less important. And there are many examples in Silicon Valley of people guessing wrong, putting all of their bets into one technology they think will be the future, and it turns out they're wrong. So even within Silicon Valley, we get it wrong all the time. I think my advice to you is, if I was looking, if I'm the voice from the future, it would be to really pay attention to the artificial intelligence space, because I think that's going to affect, if not disrupt, almost all industries. So that's my pro tip to you, is to really invest in that. And I know as small companies, you're not all going to have your own artificial intelligence expert, because honestly, there's not many in the world at the moment. This is something new, so experts are just now coming out of university. Most AI experts are about 22 years old. Like, they're very young and they're innovative, and they've just created this new technology that now needs to be applied to business. So I would say in the next few years, this is going to disrupt all industries. So hopefully publishing is something that comes along naturally with that additional learnings. I personally think it's not to be feared. It's not going to displace most workers. It just enhances what humans do best, and it's going to give us opportunities to deepen our impact. This goes back to my point earlier about efficiencies, that with more information and more processing power that you have using artificial intelligence with big data, the better we will individually be at our jobs, and the way we can increase our impact with our end users, armed with more amounts of information. But I agree to your point about being, smaller players in this bigger pond. I think that's why conferences like this are very important, because one individual can't know everything, but bringing us all together into one space to talk about what we're seeing in our individual markets or what challenges we're facing helps you identify that common denominator and see ways that you can use that group learning to benefit the whole. So I think this is a very important part of that formula of staying really current.
Sí. Sobre este punto, mi impresión, es la primera vez que vengo al Congreso de Books de Barbastro, es que aquí está, digamos, la parte innovadora, o la parte que está apostando, creyendo en lo digital para el negocio de los publishers, para el negocio del libro, al fin y al cabo. Claro, los que estamos aquí estamos convencidos, pero el challenge, el reto es cómo podemos convencer en una industria, en un sector que es típicamente muy conservador, que realmente, si le diéramos a elegir a grandes empresas del mundo de la edición, elegirían, por favor, llevarme a los 90, que estábamos mucho mejor.
Sí.
Aquí el challenge es un poco quizás más la evangelización, la comunicación, ¿no? Cómo se puede llegar a esa parte del sector diciendo, aquí se pueden hacer, en el mundo de la edición, grandes empresas, grandes compañías, se pueden conseguir estos objetivos. ¿Cómo es ese reto de comunicación?
So I think you are the important voice that will save your industry. All of you who are here and understanding the future and the challenges and what needs to be given more attention. If the leaders of these industries don't acknowledge that all businesses are internet businesses, they will become irrelevant. Everything exists online. If you don't think you work for an internet company, you're probably already dead, because you really need to maximize the abilities of e-commerce to expand your network. And any leadership who doesn't understand that will not make this transition and will not survive in the long run. We've seen cautionary tales in the States of this kind of transformation many times. For example, photos. In the States, Kodak was an enormous company that nobody thought could ever fail because they owned the entire photography market. And then we had digital cameras, and then everyone had a camera on their phone, and this thing that used to be a standard for hundreds of years is now irrelevant. And Kodak did not make the switch. Nobody's talking about Kodak when they're talking about photos, right? They're almost forgotten when they're the ones who really created this phenomenon. So that's an example of a company thinking like, oh, the traditional ways of doing things are what made us successful, so let's not change that, and now they're kind of irrelevant. You don't want your industry to be that way. It's too important, really, to the world or to our evolution, that we have this continued publication, that we reach new readers, that people are educated about things outside of their day-to-day experiences. And so I think you are fighting the good fight to get this message to those in power, to divert resources into expanding within this area and not just staying in their comfort zone, which would be their demise.
Sí. Kodak, desde luego, es un ejemplo que les va a ser familiar, es totalmente cierto. Tenemos que tener tiempo para vuestras preguntas, por supuesto. Yo tengo unas 20 mías, pero me veo obligado a seleccionar. Una es una pregunta egoísta, porque me interesa a mí. y va a mirar el resto de opciones, pero voy a hacer la pregunta egoísta, perdonad. Bueno, has hablado mucho de carrera, de principios, ¿no? Y viendo también un poco la edad de los que estamos en el Congreso, voy a disfrazar mi pregunta egoísta de pregunta colectiva. ¿Qué consejos darías un poco alrededor de las decisiones de carrera en un entorno tan cambiante, con tanta incertidumbre, que cuando eres mucho más joven, yo creo que es oportunidad, optimismo, ya no hay nadie digital, soy de los primeros, pero conforme van pasando los años, uno va buscando también en ese balance con la familia, busca una estabilidad y le entran dudas sobre las decisiones de carrera, digamos, llegada a cierta edad. ¿Cómo ves en esa mitad de la carrera las decisiones que se pueden tomar?
Yeah. I understand that there are definitely different life circumstances for each phase. When you're just out of university and you don't have responsibilities of family or paying a mortgage, and it's okay if your startup fails, you can live on your friend's sofa. Like, that's different, right? I understand that. Most of us are out of that phase, right? I'm not interested in doing that. But there are ways to remain innovative within more of a safe space. So I think the principle I was trying to outline with a story about my friend Reggie working for Obama is something of taking something that seems seemingly thankless, but is on the edge of your comfort zone, like coming to a conference or going to a conference that isn't about publishing necessarily, but about digital transformations or industries, educating yourself on something that's just outside of your normal area of responsibility can have an enormous impact, either through meeting a contact who can collaborate with you in an unexpected way, or expanding your area of expertise so you can be that advisor to the executives in your company of what trends you're seeing in the market and how you can get ahead of that and adopt that. Those are not risk-free, but those are less intimidating ways to expand your expertise and increase your value to your corporation. So I would encourage you to get outside of your comfort zone and do something that's not part of your daily routine in order to broaden your impact. And that you can do in ways that don't require, the risk of sleeping on your friend's sofa.
Okay. Bueno, quedan 10 minutos, así que creo que es el momento de abrir a todas las preguntas que tengáis. Si no vais a tener ninguna, yo tengo muchas, pero por allí levantan la mano.
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. I think that we have learned a lot of how we should approach a number of things. One of the main challenges Spanish companies we have is how to tackle the growth, not only in terms of size, but also in terms of presence in different markets.
Sorry, tackle the what?
To grow internationally in terms of size, in terms of business lines. Based on your experience working with these huge companies with an enormous footprint all around the world, and based on your knowledge from academic perspective, from international relationships, which would be the main tips that you could just share with us about how to approach a scale-up process, a growth process, a way to tackle the world in a quite more ambitious way that we usually do?
I think the first and essential thing globally, advice I would give in any country, is to focus on people first. Because if you don't have the right players in place, it doesn't matter how good your ideas are. So I always hire for the quality of thinking. I don't necessarily look for areas of expertise. This is a very Google, I've been totally indoctrinated. This is a Google way of hiring. But you look for someone who's smart and teachable and collaborative. And when you have that as the core value in your company, when you have an environment where that's celebrated, you can do anything. You can teach them areas of expertise, but you can't teach people to be inquisitive or thoughtful or challenging. You really want to bring in people to your organization that you have to hold back instead of push forward. And that alone changes most industries when you hire that way. And that's something that Silicon Valley does very well. It's a very, very competitive environment, and so that's what they're always looking for. Here in Europe, I know that there are a lot of challenges with regulation, so I would encourage any company in Europe to really be very active politically with your leaders and help them understand the way that their legislations are affecting the growth of your industry, especially true for small companies or startups, because there's a lot the government can do to invest in homegrown talent that would really give you a competitive advantage globally that I think currently doesn't exist. I just left Google on September 1st, and the last 3 or 4 years, that's what I focused 100% of my time on, was doing political analysis, helping Eric meet with these global leaders who could have an impact on business just through tax incentives or for debt forgiveness or incentives for investors that changes the sector. So I think the things you can control are who's in your company and what challenges you give them and what kind of environment you create that allows for failure and is very data-driven. And then the second part would be to really engage your community as a whole to do the right thing for your businesses here in Spain or wherever you are. Those are the two parts I think are most important for innovation.
Por aquí, hay una pregunta más.
Muchas gracias, Anne, por la charla que nos has dado. Para mí ha sido inspiradora. Y yo quería referirme a uno de los atributos que has comentado, que era el de ser equilibrado. Entonces, has tenido la suerte de trabajar con Jeff Bezos, y por ejemplo, Elon Musk, Phil Knight, Steve Jobs, Tony Siet, gente, líderes en todo este tema, que son gente que dedica 80, 100 horas semanales a sacar su causa, su proyecto, a inspirar a los demás. Y entonces mi pregunta es, ¿crees con franqueza que ocurre en la realidad con estos líderes que son equilibrados? ¿O realmente nuestro proyecto profesional, nuestra pasión por esa causa hace que nuestra vida personal, en fases de nuestra vida, pues dejen un poquito de que tengan menos espacio, ¿no? O le dediquemos menos tiempo. Gracias.
Balance is something that everyone is trying to achieve, and I do think there are different phases of that in our lives. Yes, my first job out of university working for Jeff, I didn't have responsibilities. I was newly married, I didn't have any children, so I worked 100-hour weeks because I knew it was such a privilege to sit next to Jeff. To me, it felt better than business school to be next to this like creative genius. But Jeff himself was his version of balanced. So what I mean by that is, yes, he worked constantly, but for him it was different because there is nothing in the world he would rather do than what he does every day. He doesn't need the money. He's the wealthiest man in the world, and he continues to work at that pace because it rejuvenates him. It gives him a lot back. And so for him, that experience isn't draining. It's actually really fulfilling. Now, not everyone experiences that working for Jeff. I know he definitely burns people out because he just works on another level. But he's successful because that's not how he experiences it. He experiences it as like exciting and having the most fun he could possibly have every day. So I think that's the lesson that individuals can adopt from that is like, don't follow his schedule, but follow that passion of weaving your work into something that's constantly giving you something back. There's a great Harvard Business Review article about this that talks about shifting from a performance feedback to learning feedback. So that means in a new challenge, really prioritizing what am I going to learn from this? Is this going to expand my area of expertise? Is this going to help me be more creative in my industry or apply my knowledge in a new way? Or is it going to be something where I'm just evaluated against this scale and I might fail and that's not going to be received very well? So I think you can work at that pace when it is giving to you as much as you are giving it to it, if that makes sense, right? Making sure that your work is fulfilling to you. And for me, once you're focused on the learning, it's not about the hours. It's about this like beautiful process of expanding and learning. And it's, sometimes you're super efficient. You do that in 40 hours a week. And sometimes you find a passion project and it's 100 hours a week. But the most important part, more important than the hours, is what you're receiving from it and that it's rejuvenating and building you instead of draining you.
Me dicen que tenemos tiempo para una fácil, una corta. Es ahora muy difícil. y una que tengo que yo creo que es obligatoria en un congreso de ebooks o de libros. Como no está surgiendo, os voy a hacer esta primera que era, creo que nos deberíamos siempre ir de un congreso como este con lectura. Así que te voy a preguntar un libro que haya sido importante, aprovechando que eras muy cercana para Bezos, un libro importante para Marisa Meyer y un libro importante para ti. Esta es una pregunta un poco...
Ay.
Si me la hicieran a mí, estaría con la gota. No el más, porque eso requiere horas y días de introspección, pero un libro que podemos seguir leyendo por aquí para que el congreso no termine.
So I could answer for Jeff and Marissa and Eric in categories. They could probably answer this specific book better than I could, and then I can tell you what I'm reading right now. I think Jeff, today, if we were to check on his nightstand, would definitely have a science fiction book. I watched him read that voraciously. I mean, I don't know where the man finds the time, but he is constantly devouring books. And I know sci-fi was very inspiring to him when he was young. In his high school valedictorian speech, he told his entire school that he was going to space. And it was inspired by his reading when he was young about, science fiction and space travel. And he's doing it. I mean, when you have more money than anyone else in the world, you can build a private space tourism business and take yourself to space. So I'm sure he's reading something about space right now. For Marissa, she is a very unique person in that she has this unusual combination of expertise in very, very technical things and in very creative things. Her master's degree at Stanford was in artificial intelligence systems before anyone was even talking about that. And then she also has this amazing design eye. She's probably the only person at Google who wore anything besides jeans and a hoodie. She's constantly wearing like very nice designers because she's sensitive to that. She has an appreciation for making things not only like data-driven but beautiful, which was why she was in charge of the Google homepage originally. She kept it very clean when all the other, search companies were just like full of crazy information. That is all thanks to Marissa. So I would imagine she's either reading something very, very technical on artificial intelligence and probably simultaneously reading something about a designer or an artist that inspires her. And Eric reads everything. I am constantly surprised by what he's reading, so I think it would be impossible for me to guess. But he's probably reading 5 books at the same time, which is what I do. Something about politics, something about artificial intelligence, and something about creativity, I imagine, because those are themes that I've seen him really value.
Okay.
For me, I am right now reading at least 3 books, depending on my mood. One is Principles by Ray Dalio. It looks like an encyclopedia. It's like this big, but it's the first half of it is just about management principles, about how he created the wealthiest and most successful hedge fund in the United States. And I think those principles of management and talent development and a lot of things that we've been talking about today, he outlines really well in that book. Second, I'm reading a book by John Doerr, who is a board member at both Amazon and Google. So I've seen him every few months for the last 15 years. And he was one of the original investors in both of those companies. And his book is about OKRs, which is how we do community-based goals within both of those companies. So how you get buy-in from your peers and increase success through collaborative goal making. And then I'm also reading Originals by my friend Adam Grant, who I mentioned earlier, who's a professor at Wharton, who he's a behavioral psychologist who focuses on workplace. So those are the 3 things I'm reading now. Great.
Perfecto. He's saying that the book will be posted by Dave Stone in Spain next week.
Perfect.
Perfect, Javier.
Sí.
Perfect. Bueno, nos llevamos
Don't
no
worry, I
solo
understand.
algunos libros, sino nos llevamos bibliotecas enteras. Así que creo que es el momento de despedirnos y sobre todo de agradecer a Anne este momento que ha compartido con nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Gracias a ti. Gracias. Thank you. Sí.